Let me ask you guys something. You like boats? Resident Evil 4 is one of the most successful games of the 6th generation, and it revolutionized the survival horror genre with its over-the-shoulder camera and gameplay that balance action and horror together in a near-perfect blend. But we all know that, right? Okay, but what if I told you there was another game for the PS2 that also innovated its own over-the-shoulder camera, mixes action and horror, as well as a litany of other unique mechanics not found in Resident Evil 4, or any other survival horror game for that matter, but it was left forgotten to time, selling only a fraction of what Resident Evil 4 did? That game is Cold Fear, and it's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into it, I am playing through every single survival horror game on the PlayStation 2, and I'll be doing an in-depth look at every single one of them right here, so if you're interested, please throw me a sub and ring the bell. It would mean the world.
Can't hear you.
Hansen!
Just kidding.
Cold Fear was developed by the French studio Darkworks and was the first ever horror title to be published by Ubisoft. Darkworks, having just released Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare, was looking forward to continuing down their path of wickedness with another horror game, but wanted to shake things up a bit, leaving behind the standard fare of a house of horrors and boarding a ship set for the Bering Sea. Beginning development in early 2003 with only 10 developers, Darkworks had 3 primary ambitions for Cold Fear, which they revealed in a Q&A with worthplaying.com. 1. Create a horror game with an environment set in motion that has an impact on the player's experience and a very distinctive look. 2. To free the action of the player in terms of moving and shooting. And 3. To have more realism, modern settings, and various enemies that allow situations where you have to be fast and reactive. These points, coupled with being overall intrigued by the idea of a Coast Guard fighting on a lost ship trapped in a huge storm, propelled the team ever forward, bringing the original 10 developers to a sizable 60 by the game's release in 2005. When it came to meeting their goal of immersing the player in a moving environment, specifically a moving boat lost in a constantly moving and realistic ocean, the team had very little examples or rubrics to work from, as this type of thing hadn't really been done before. Speaking on this very subject in a 2004 interview with GameSpot, lead programmer Claude Levestre offered valuable insight on the process of building the program to bring this moving world to life. We were quickly able to make the ship move, but to achieve a more realistic movement, we had to develop a complete roll editor. When out at sea, a ship moves both on a vertical axis, roll, and a horizontal axis, pitch. Our Darkwave editor allows us to separately generate the pitch and roll following 2 different curves, and it's the combination of both of these that creates a realistic movement. While the technological feat was impressive in itself, it wasn't the only innovation the team executed during development. Going back again to the team's ambitions, you might recall the words freedom of movement and shooting. For a 6th generation console title, this is actually a touch more unique than it may sound, at least in survival horror, as the game that popularized this, Resident Evil 4, had yet to be released at this stage in development. To this point in time, most survival horror games adapted very similar camera stylings, fixed camera angles that added a cinematic flair and would carry atmosphere and tension, as well as occasionally preventing the player from seeing what's ahead. While this is an extremely effective mechanic in horror, and one that's still utilized today in a multitude of ways in and out of the horror genre, a fixed camera just wouldn't be quite the right move for a game focusing on action and freedom of movement. And so it was that Cold Fear became, at least to my understanding, the first survival horror game to employ an over-the-shoulder camera while shooting. Now, to be clear, we have seen over-the-shoulder cameras in video games prior to this, the most notable early use being Splinter Cell in the PlayStation 1. This is totally different. Cold Fear still retained the fixed camera in most situations when you weren't aiming your weapon, thus retaining a certain amount of survival horror identity. Alright, I know what you're thinking. Maddie, this is all incredibly interesting, well-researched, well-presented, and for an early video on your channel, you're knocking it out of the f***ing park. But how is the game? Why haven't I heard of it? Is it good? Well, I'm sorry to say, but Cold Fear is a bad game. And it's a serious bummer because I genuinely think that Darkworks did some tremendously genius stuff, but I gotta be honest, the game itself is a real f***ing doozy. And I know that's gonna be a hot take to some people. I've seen comments, it needs a remake. I wanna see this game done again. This was so great, it's so underrated. I don't fucking understand where you're coming from at all. I do not think this game is very good. So let's get into it. Let's get into the nuts and bolts. Put your gun down, let me explain. Beginning with the story and presentation of the game, Cold Fear takes place on a giant ship floating around the dark vastness of the Bering Sea. You play as Tom Hansen, a Navy SEAL tasked with investigating the mysterious ship. And what does he find? You're never gonna believe this. A ship loaded with zombie-like creatures that were the result of eugenics, genetic mutations, science experiments, Resident Evil stuff, you get it. You fight your way through, rescue the girl, get away on the helicopter. Not exactly reinventing the wheel on this front, but it gets the job done. I don't really mind that the story is uninspired. I mean, it's a survival horror game, right? But what I do mind is how little anyone making the game seemed to care about it. The story and direction all seem to change on a dime without any real weight or purpose. And that's not to say there's no lore here, because there is. It's actually somewhat interesting, but unfortunately all the interesting lore is subjugated to item pickups and documents, which are at times unbelievably long and not always that interesting. And that would be okay if the game itself was keeping me interested in the lore and the story, or even just the combat. But instead, they just seem to use dialogue and cutscenes for bad action and hysterical dialogue, and leave the actually interesting bits to the documents, which I have no interest in reading when the world itself is so vapid. Speaking of dialogue, my God.
The autopilot is locked.
Then unlock it.
Good idea.
Bad dialogue can be a positive or a negative when we're talking about old games. If I didn't love hilariously corny dialogue,
you were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
I would have a really hard time loving this genre of games as much as I do. Truth be told, I really love the bad dialogue from a kind of, wow, that's so bad it's good standpoint.
Hey, I found the captain. He's a corpsicle.
In Cold Fear, the dialogue isn't bad enough to be so bad it's good. It's just bad.
I won't be able to help you.
I'm heartbroken.
I'm serious, Hansen.
One thing I don't understand about this game is the lack of map. It's generally a small area, but with so many environments kind of blending together and with so many doors and load screens, it stops feeling immersive and starts feeling tedious, as the environment and atmosphere just aren't strong enough to carry such tedious gameplay. I respect the boldness of not using a map, but it just ain't that kind of game. And this is coming from someone who legitimately loves being lost in games and just kind of dawdling around foolishly, but this just wasn't that for me. Now, onto gameplay. All of the effort they put into making the ship feel real and into making the waves crash realistically into the whaler really paid off. It does feel really real. When the boat rocks, there are times when you actually have to hold on to something, otherwise you'll slide off the ship, which you can do at any time with the press of a button, creating yet again another very unique mechanic. Unfortunately, I think this is a bit to its downfall, as I feel legitimately seasick for the first 20 minutes or so before eventually acclimating. The indoor environments are fine. You still get some rocking here and there, and I think that was handled just fine. But man, being outside is neat at best and dizzying at worst, and that's a real bummer. This game has the ability to make you vomit, but not because it's gory, but rather because you'll feel seasick. That said, however, big shout out to how the ballistics on the guns feel. Everything feels kind of visceral and heavy, specifically the shotgun. The shotgun feels incredible, but with any gun, seeing people's head explodes like melon is very satisfying the first 100 times or so at least. Which brings me to my next point of contention, which is that the gameplay loop is essentially just shoot every single head of every enemy all the time. Standing, sitting, sleeping, on the ground, does not matter.
Shoot him in the head! Shoot him in the head!
And that sounds sick, but there's some areas in this game where you can walk into a room, see a bunch of enemies on the floor, shoot the heads of every enemy while they're sleeping, and then you just explore the level freely. No problem, no stress. Easy peasy, salami in the bag. And you're gonna want to do that because God forbid they do get up and you become engaged in a combat scenario, because this is the kind of music that you're gonna be hearing. There's nothing less scary than this music. Why? Why is this what they chose to go with? I don't think shooting the humanoid enemies in Cold Fear is overall not fun and not enjoyable. The heads sway around and make aiming more challenging. They ragdoll backwards when you shoot them in a very Resident Evil 4 style, but as we said before Resident Evil 4, which is cool. But during this fun gameplay, you get completely removed from any sense of immersion via this ridiculous music. The scariest parts of the game are generally the jump scares, but 99% of the time this can be obfuscated by just shooting the dead enemies in the head before they have a chance to get up and scare you, as they only get up once you trigger them proximity, and with the incredible laser sight on your pistol, you can just blow everything away the second you see them on the ground from 150,000 feet away. I can't believe there's a game out there that makes headshots feel boring and tedious, but there is, and it's this one.
But I'm not done yet.
The closest thing to challenging this game gets is these noodly pieces of shit. These fucking jelly bags of water. Killing the parasites is easily my least favorite part of the game. They just reach up and wet willy away your health bar, move around quickly, make them hard to shoot, but you have to shoot them because if you try stomping on them, which is cool that you can stomp on things, if you try to stomp on them, they're guaranteed to wreck your health in the process. Consequence is another real issue in the game, both in gameplay and narrative, because there is none. You get to the second big area of the game, they take all your weapons away, leaving you with just your pistol, but I was looking forward to starting over and whatever challenge that would bring. However, you only have 1 or 2 enemy encounters with the pistol, then you're immediately given back your shotgun, harpoon gun, and AK-47. Why? What was the point of taking everything away just to give it all back to me 5 minutes later in the first chance I had to have any combat? This game is not good. Cold Fear released in North America on March 15th of 2005. The same day Candy Shop by 50 Cent was released, I might add, which is pretty sick. And in its first year, it only sold about 70,000 units across PS2, Xbox, and PC combined. Now, what did other people think of the game? The atmosphere's major saving grace is the music and sound effects. The music is dramatic and very flexible, changing with the mood as necessary. That's it, I'm done. We're done with this game. Cold Fear is full of ideas that are fresh and creative, but ultimately result in an overall boring, tedious experience that only rarely ever reaches anything beyond average. That's how I feel. I'm sorry. I know that people feel differently. If you like this game, that's great. There's lots and lots of stuff that I love that plenty of other people hate.
Fortnite, we like Fortnite.
So there you go. That's my take on it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll smell you later.